Mara cannot buy us out with money from her little lamp hobby, my brother said. Dean slid the appraisal across our mother's dining table and suggested we accept a developer's offer by Friday. My sister Lisa avoided my eyes. They believed Copper Finch lighting barely paid for itself, and they wanted the inherited house settled before Dean's loan came due. I did not correct his guess. I asked why the developer's offer was $90,000 below the independent appraisal, and why one signature page had arrived already completed. My name is Mara Ellis. I was 62 that spring, a widow, and the owner of a narrow lighting repair shop on Alder Street. Copper Finch looked modest from the sidewalk. Two brass lamps stood in the window, and a hand-painted sign hung above the door. Behind that storefront sat a restoration studio, an online parts business, and commercial contracts that had quietly made my net worth more than $1 million. I had never treated the shop as a secret test for my family. It began 24 years earlier, after my husband Paul lost his job and my mother gave me an old lamp to repair. I rewired it at the kitchen table, sold it to a restaurant, and used the money to buy tools. Paul found new work, but customers kept bringing damaged fixtures. By the time our daughter left for college, the shop supported 4 employees. Paul died 9 years before the argument at our mother's table. Work became the structure that carried me through mornings I did not know how to enter. I learned to restore hotel sconces, library lamps, and discontinued switches that manufacturers no longer stocked. I also learned that grief could make usefulness feel like identity. I kept my success quiet partly from habit, and partly because talking about money felt like asking people to measure my life after Paul by a balance sheet. Dean and Lisa saw only the storefront. Dean ran a residential painting company with 12 employees. Lisa taught middle school and managed most of our mother's medical appointments during her final year. Both had real responsibilities. At family gatherings, Dean called Copper Finch my retirement hobby. Lisa used the gentler phrase, creative little business. I usually smiled because correcting them would have required a conversation I kept postponing. Our mother, June, understood more. She visited the workshop every Tuesday and knew the back room held 40 workstations during our largest hotel project. She never asked for revenue figures, but she saw payroll envelopes when we still used paper checks. 6 months before she died, she asked whether my siblings knew the shop's scale. I said they knew enough. She told me people could not honor work they had been trained to misunderstand. Her will divided the family house equally among the 3 of us. The house was valued at $630,000. June had lived there for 41 years, and the garden behind it contained a greenhouse Paul helped repair. I wanted to buy Dean and Lisa's shares at a fair appraised price, then leased the house for 5 years to a local nonprofit that provided temporary housing for families receiving hospital care. I had discussed the idea with the nonprofit, but I had not made a promise. Their director said the location near the hospital could serve 2 families at a time. Renovations would cost about $80,000, and the nonprofit could afford below-market rent. I could cover the difference without weakening Copper Finch. The plan preserved the house, paid my siblings fairly, and gave the property a purpose. It also required them to believe I could finance it. Dean faced pressure I did not fully understand at first. His painting company had lost 2 large contracts after a builder delayed projects. He had personally guaranteed equipment debt and needed cash within 60 days. A developer named Roland Pierce offered $540,000 for the house with a rapid closing. Dean wanted certainty more than the highest price. Lisa wanted the estate finished because a year of caregiving had exhausted her. Their pressure explained the speed. It did not justify dismissing me. At our first estate meeting, I proposed ordering an independent appraisal before accepting any offer. Dean laughed and said appraisals were useful only if a real buyer appeared. He told Lisa that my attachment to old objects was charming in a shop and expensive in an estate. Lisa asked me not to turn the house into another restoration project. The appraisal came back at $630,000. Dean immediately produced Roland's revised offer of $540,000, still $90,000 lower. He said the fast closing and as-is purchase justified the discount. I asked for 7 days to present a financed buyout at the appraised value. Dean said he could not wait for a hobby business to find money it did not have. I did not reveal my accounts at the table because the estate needed a process, not a family spectacle. I proposed 3 rules in writing. We would use the independent appraisal. Each sibling could obtain legal advice, and no one would sign before comparing net proceeds and timing. I also offered Dean a short bridge payment against my eventual buyout share, documented through the estate attorney. He refused because accepting it would mean admitting my plan was real. The next morning, I met with my accountant, Nisha Rao. Copper Finch had produced more than $4 million in revenue during the previous year, though revenue was not personal wealth. After wages, materials, taxes, and reserves, my distributions were much smaller. Over 2 decades, I had saved and invested enough to become a millionaire without selling the shop or exploiting its employees. Nisha confirmed I could fund the sibling buyout and renovations without borrowing against payroll. The shop had grown quietly through work most customers never saw. A historic hotel once hired us to reproduce 216 brass shade holders. Instead of outsourcing them, we partnered with a local metal shop and created reusable tooling. That project led to contracts with 7 hotel groups. Later, our online catalog began shipping hard-to-find sockets and switches to restoration firms across the country. The contract that changed Copper Finch nearly broke us first. The hotel required every restored fixture to pass a documented electrical test, and our original record system relied on handwritten tags. Carla designed a digital condition report that linked photographs, parts, labor, and final inspection. We spent 3 months rebuilding our workflow before earning a profit. That system later allowed small restoration firms to order verified components from us. The wealth grew from repeatable discipline, not a sudden lucky sale. I did not become wealthy because one lamp sold for a magical price. The business earned modest margins across thousands of specific problems. We paid 14 full-time employees, 6 part-time craftspeople, and 2 apprentices. Senior employees shared an annual profit pool. My wealth accumulated because I kept ownership, reinvested carefully, and lived in the same small house Paul and I bought before the shop opened. Dean visited Copper Finch only twice in 10 years. On the second visit, he stood near the front counter and saw one employee polishing a chandelier arm. The commercial studio was behind a secured door because completed fixtures were insured for clients. He assumed the front room was the business. I allowed that assumption to survive because I was tired of defending the value of work he considered decorative. That avoidance was my flaw. Silence protected me from awkward conversations, but it also forced other people to build explanations from incomplete evidence. Dean filled the gap with condescension. Lisa filled it with concern. Neither response was fair, yet I had chosen privacy long after privacy stopped being necessary. June had warned me, and I heard her voice while Nisha prepared the proof of funds letter. Before I could present it, a complication arrived. Roland sent Lisa a message saying the developer's offer would expire in 48 hours. He claimed another property had become available. Dean called an emergency meeting and asked the estate attorney to circulate signature pages. The attorney refused to treat the deadline as unanimous consent and reminded us that all 3 beneficiaries needed to approve the sale. Dean accused me of using sentiment to trap his money in the house. I told him I understood his deadline and would provide verified funds by noon the next day. He said a bank letter did not change the fact that I had spent my life fixing lamps while he ran a real company. Lisa asked him to stop. Then she asked me quietly whether I was risking my retirement to prove a point. Our different memories of caregiving added another layer. Lisa had handled appointments and medication schedules. Dean repaired the porch and paid several utility bills. I visited twice each week and covered a home aide for 6 months, but I never told them the aide's invoices came from shop distributions. Lisa believed I had contributed time because money was tight. Learning otherwise could make her feel that I had watched her carry too much. The estate argument was exposing more than property assumptions. That question hurt more than Dean's insult. Lisa was trying to protect me, but protection built on disrespect still reduced my judgment. I said I would not endanger the shop, my employees, or my retirement. She asked how she could know. I told her she would receive documents from professionals, not promises from a wounded sister. Nisha and the estate attorney structured the offer. I would pay each sibling $210,000. 1/3 of the appraised value, less agreed estate expenses. Dean could receive $50,000 within 10 business days after signing, with the balance at closing. Lisa would receive her share at closing. The nonprofit lease and renovations would begin only after title transferred and inspections were complete. The offer included no discount for my emotional attachment. I did not ask Dean or Lisa to donate part of their inheritance to the housing plan. If the property later increased in value, that risk and benefit would be mine. If repairs cost more, I would cover them. Fairness meant giving them the value of what they owned, not asking them to finance my purpose. At the second meeting, I placed the proof of funds letter beside the appraisal. Dean read the first line twice. The letter verified liquid assets sufficient for the purchase and renovation reserve. It did not list my full net worth. He asked whether Paul had left me money. I said the shop had earned it. Lisa looked from the letter to me and asked what Copper Finch actually did. I explained the hotel contracts, parts catalog, and staff. Dean said revenue could be impressive while profit remained small. I agreed and handed them summarized statements reviewed by Nisha. The documents showed consistent profit, cash reserves, and distributions across 5 years. They also showed that the business had not borrowed to create the buyout funds. Dean's face changed, but not into admiration. He looked betrayed. He asked how long I had let him believe I needed help. I reminded him I had never asked him for money. He said the family had spent years making plans around my supposed limitations. Lisa asked whether our mother knew. I said June knew the shop was substantial but not my exact finances. So the hobby made you a millionaire, Dean said. The business made me secure, I replied. The people working there helped make it valuable. The distinction mattered because money was already distorting the room. Dean began treating my offer as proof that I should solve his entire debt problem. He asked whether I could increase the advance to $120,000 and close within 2 weeks. The estate attorney said inspections, title review, and transfer documents made that timeline unrealistic. I offered the original $50,000 bridge under written terms and no more. Dean called the boundary punishment for his joke. I told him the amount had been proposed before he saw my financial documents. Changing it to prove generosity would be as emotional as lowering it to prove anger. Lisa supported the documented schedule. For the first time, she challenged Dean directly and said his business emergency did not convert my savings into a family account. That should have settled the decision. Instead, Rowan increased his offer to $580,000 and promised a 3-week closing. The price remained below the appraisal, but Dean argued it reduced uncertainty. Lisa became undecided again. My offer was higher, yet it required them to trust a plan connected to a nonprofit they had never met. I invited both of them to Copper Finch before the final vote. I did not plan a dramatic reveal. The visit would include the commercial studio, order system, and payroll schedule so they could understand the source and limits of my offer. Lisa accepted. Dean said he did not need a tour of a lamp hobby to read a bank letter. The estate attorney advised him that understanding my financing was optional, while comparing net offers was not. Lisa arrived on Thursday morning. She saw the restoration benches, packing stations, and shelves of labeled components. She met Carla Newen, our studio director, who had worked with me for 16 years. Carla explained how orders moved from condition reports through rewiring, fabrication, inspection, and shipping. Lisa watched 2 apprentices test a hotel sconce under supervision. At noon, the workshop paused for its weekly safety review. An apprentice reported that a supplier's new socket cracked under normal tightening pressure. Carla quarantined the batch and delayed 40 shipments rather than treat the defect as cosmetic. Lisa asked what the delay would cost. Carla said less than recalling finished lamps from 40 customers. The exchange showed why the shop looked calm from the front. Problems were being stopped in rooms my family had never entered. She did not respond with instant praise. She asked why I had never shown her. I said I had invited her to the storefront, but never corrected the assumption that the front was everything. Lisa said those were not the same thing. She had told friends I repaired lamps to keep busy after Paul died. Now, she felt she had turned my employees' livelihoods into a comforting story about my grief. I told her shame was not useful unless it changed behavior. I also apologized for deciding in advance that she would react badly to my success. We had both protected an easier version of our relationship. The shop tour did not erase the estate disagreement, but it allowed us to discuss the actual offer instead of a fictional risk to my retirement. Dean came after hours, alone. He walked through the studio while Carla completed inventory. He asked practical questions about contract concentration, insurance, and what would happen if hotel renovations slowed. His questions were sharp and fair. I showed him that no single client represented more than 14% of annual revenue, and that the parts business balanced project cycles. Then he asked why I had not invested in his painting company. I said he had never asked with documents or terms. He had mentioned cash casually at family dinners and assumed I lacked it. I would consider a formal proposal in the future, but not while his debt pressure affected the estate negotiation. Mixing those decisions would make consent impossible to measure. Dean said family should not require a loan committee. I said family deserved clearer terms because refusal and affection had to survive in the same room. He left angry, but he took a copy of the offer comparison. That was more progress than an apology made under shock. The following morning, the three of us met with the attorney. The comparison showed Roland's offer would give each sibling less money even after accounting for my longer closing schedule. My bridge payment addressed Dean's immediate deadline. Lisa voted to accept my buyout. Dean remained silent for several minutes, then agreed. He said he was choosing the strongest offer, not endorsing the nonprofit plan. I said that was enough. He did not have to share my purpose to receive a fair result. We signed the buyout agreement, not the final transfer. The attorney reminded us that inspections and title work could still reveal problems. No one celebrated. The decision felt responsible, which was better than triumphant. The inspection found old wiring and moisture damage near the greenhouse. Repairs added $32,000 to the budget. Because the risk belonged to me after the agreed transfer point, I did not ask my siblings to reduce their payments. The discovery delayed the nonprofit lease by 6 weeks. Dean received his bridge funds on schedule, allowing him to bring his equipment loan current. For a brief period, the family seemed calm. Then Dean told 2 relatives that I had concealed a fortune while watching him struggle. The story reached Lisa, who corrected it. She said I had disclosed funds when the estate required proof and had offered a bridge before anyone knew my net worth. Dean accused her of taking my side because she had toured the shop. I called him once. I said he was free to feel hurt by my secrecy, but not to claim I had refused a request he never formally made. He asked whether I cared that his company might fail. I said I cared deeply and would review a proposal after the estate closed. I would not write a rescue check without knowing whether it protected jobs or delayed a larger problem. The house transferred 3 months later. Dean and Lisa received their balances. The nonprofit signed a 5-year lease after inspections and renovation plans were approved. The first family moved in near the end of summer while their daughter received treatment at the hospital. I did not tell my siblings the family's private story. The house's purpose did not need emotional marketing. Lisa visited after the first month and noticed that June's dining table remained in the kitchen. The nonprofit used it for shared meals between visiting families. Dean chose not to tour the house, but he donated leftover paint through his company after the renovation contractor requested a specific finish. I paid the invoice price rather than accepting a family favor. He reduced it only by the same trade discount he offered other nonprofit projects. Dean eventually submitted a business proposal. Nisha reviewed it separately from Copper Finch. His painting company had profitable work but poor cash timing and equipment debt priced too aggressively. I declined to invest as an owner. Instead, I offered to pay for an independent restructuring consultation with no obligation to accept its recommendations. Dean refused at first, then agreed when his foreman offered to attend. The consultant helped Dean renegotiate schedules with 2 customers and sell 1 underused vehicle. I did not receive equity, and he did not become indebted to me personally. His business stabilized slowly. That outcome did not prove I had been right about every choice. It proved help worked better when it addressed the actual problem instead of rewarding the loudest deadline. Lisa began visiting Copper Finch once a month. She did not suddenly become interested in lighting restoration. She brought lunch and asked employees about their work. Carla invited her to see the profit-sharing report, but I kept financial details private unless staff chose to discuss them. Respect did not require turning the shop into a family display. Dean's apology came almost a year after the dining table argument. He stood in the front room and said he had called the shop a hobby because its quietness made him feel superior. He also said my secrecy had made trust harder. I agreed with both statements. I apologized for letting him build plans around an assumption I knew was false, though I did not apologize for keeping exact finances private. We did not become a perfectly close family. Dean still believed I could have helped sooner. I still believed he treated urgency as authority. Lisa remained tired of being placed between us. We changed one practical thing. Every 3 months, we met for lunch with no estate, loan, or business requests, unless they had been sent in writing first. Copper Finch continued operating from the same narrow storefront. The hotel contracts renewed, the parts catalog expanded, and 2 apprentices became full-time technicians. My net worth rose and fell with the business, investments, and property. I stopped describing it as the important result. The more meaningful measure was that 22 people could plan their month because payroll arrived on time. I also changed how the shop communicated its scale. We added a small window panel explaining that the storefront supported a commercial restoration studio and parts business. It listed services, not revenue. I showed Julia, our front counter manager, how to correct the word hobby without sounding defensive. We did not need strangers to admire the company. We needed customers, suppliers, and future employees to understand what kind of work they were entering. Sometimes customers still entered and asked whether repairing lamps was my retirement hobby. I told them it was my profession and asked what they needed fixed. I did not give them a revenue speech. Correcting a false label required only the truth, not a performance of wealth. My family called my shop a hobby because I had allowed silence to become the only explanation available. The shop did make me a millionaire, but money was not the final proof that the work mattered. Its real value lived in skilled hands, honest invoices, steady wages, and a house purchased without cheating my siblings. Quiet success did not require disappearing. It required knowing when privacy protected dignity and when the truth was necessary for fairness.